Two Jews, Three Opinions. Welcome to the Book of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. In this August 2008 episode, we talk to two Jews and we get way more than three opinions. These two conversations are the last of the material I recorded at this year's Book Expo. Smart, articulate women Kathy Bloomfield and Laurel Snyder helped me explore Jewish identity and how it affects our reading and our writing. Kathy Bloomfield is widely known as the owner of 4 Words, the Jewish children's book fair company she ran for many years. Now she works for the Union for Reform Judaism, but she keeps up with kids' books as a member of the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee. Kathy and I got together during this year's Book Expo for a really interesting conversation about her life as a Jew by choice and how her double consciousness affects her reading. So I'm sitting here with Kathy Bloomfield, who has many different roles within the Jewish literary community. So I want to talk to you about some of those roles that you have played. I think a lot of people are familiar with you from your book company that you had in the past, 4 Words, and also now you're a member of the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee for the Association of Jewish Libraries.
That's right.
So I wanted to talk to you about those roles, especially in the light of your identity as a Jew by choice.
Okay.
So first, give us a little bit of background on why you chose to be a Jew by choice.
My husband and I married 28 years ago now, and
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And before we were married, my husband had agreed to raise our children Catholic. But about 6 months after our son had been born, and I said, we need to go and have the baptism classes or whatever, my husband started mumbling things about, I can't break the chain, or I'm not sure I can do this, and I was sort of shocked by that. And he said he didn't think he could raise Catholic children. What we ended up doing was we went to baptism classes and we spoke to a rabbi. And through some very long talks and clear discussions, we made the decision to raise our children Jewish. It was several years after that I came to the knowledge that I was living a Jewish life and that I might as well join the club and take the plunge, as it were. And so 11 years then into our marriage, I converted to Judaism as well. And I'm glad that it worked out the way it is because I came to it of my own decision, and I really researched it a lot. For me, it was a complete change of identity, and I found that it was something I had to do for myself, and it wasn't something I could do otherwise in any other way. It just had to evolve for me. And it evolved in a really very personal way. And that just started a whole series of events, everything from being president of my temple to having my own Jewish book fair company to working with the Union for Reform Judaism, and it's all been really wonderful. So,
I've noticed in your work with the Sidney Taylor Book Award Committee that it's interesting how your Catholic background knowledge sometimes is extremely useful on the committee. I almost feel like we should always have a Jew by choice on the committee because sometimes you notice Christian overtones in a book where the rest of us don't even see it because we're completely unaware of symbols or other things that maybe have a deeper meaning than what it looks like on the surface.
Yeah, I do see that too. I know that we get books from Christian publishing houses often, and they're wonderful books. And when I had 4 Words, I would often look at Christian catalogs to look for those books. And publishing companies like Erdman's and Zondervan and those, they do wonderful books. But I also recognize from my Christian or Catholic background that there are symbols and messages that come through in those books that you may not be aware of as a Jewish person, that perhaps in an interfaith family, a Catholic or a Christian person would be very aware of. And so you don't want to send mixed messages to people. It's fine, if the book goes into a Jewish home, that message isn't going to be delivered. They're not going to see it. But if it goes into an interfaith home, it's going to be sending a message that says, well, wait a minute, I got this out of my Jewish library. What?
Yeah.
So I'm always got an antenna up. Is this really a book that we want to be recommending as Jewish librarians to our community? If it's something that is sort of delivering a message that's not the message we want to be delivering, that is something I do pick up on. And on the other hand, I look at books, the committee recognizes this is not quite as Jewish enough, but I think it delivers a very strong Jewish message of a value.
So it's all about the message.
To me, it's all about the message and what the value is in the book.
So not so much whether the book has overt Jewish content, but whether it feels like a Jewish mindset or value being communicated.
Exactly. And that was the same when I had 4 Words. I used to bring onto my inventory a lot of secular books that I felt had a strong Jewish values message, because you want people having books they're comfortable with in their home, but didn't necessarily have to have such strong Jewish, I guess visually strong Jewish looks about it. Because we do have families in our community where you are working with people at all levels. You were talking about the Jewish Outreach Institute earlier with me to kind of pick up on some things that they do. There's a concept of meeting people where they are. And not everybody is as comfortable in their Jewish skins as perhaps people on the committee are. And so my feeling is, let's meet people where they are. Maybe they're more comfortable with a book that has a very small amount of Judaica in it, and yet that book could have enough Jewish values in it that it would convey such a wonderful message to that family that it would be worthwhile for us to put that in our Jewish libraries.
Can you think of an example of a title?
Well, I'm thinking of something from long ago. There was the book Andrew's Angry Words. It's not a Jewish book at all. And yet the concept of that book about if I say something angry, and now that makes that person angry, and that person says something angry to the next person. And that chain of angry words just goes on and on and on until finally someone stops it and says something nice back, and now those nice words go back around. It's a wonderful concept of the power of words.
Right.
Now, that's not a Jewish book, and yet the concept of the power of words is an extremely Jewish concept.
Yes.
And so that's not a book that would ever come across the Sidney Taylor Award committee. And yet I feel that's a really strong Jewish book. Or today I was seeing books in the Tilbury House catalog. There's this book, Say Something. They describe it as a book about bullying. But in actual fact, it's a book about speaking out, about saying something. When somebody's doing something wrong, about saying something. And when you don't say something, then it could turn against you, so that there's not someone to speak out for you when you're in a situation. And this is not a Jewish book, and yet I was struck by the comparison with
the quote.
That quote.
Right.
You know the quote I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Then there was no one. They came for
whoever, and then there was no one left to come to me.
Exactly. And I'm thinking, my goodness, here's this book for kids that so parallels with that quote that we all know.
Right. And that neither of us can
think of, but that we are all aware of, and anyone probably that's listening to this probably can remember it as well. But here's a kid's book about that. I mean, it's not a Jewish children's book, and yet this is a great book.
There was a book, I think it was last year, from Jewish Lights, and it was called Who is a Jew?
Who is a
It's sort
Jew?
of an identity book.
Yes.
And I'd be curious
I
about...
love that book.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to know what you thought about the book, and also just curious about your view of Jewish identity.
I like that book because it presented Jews in all faces. Like, I don't know, what does a Jew look like? A Jew could look like anything. A Jew could have any kind of last name. There are no assumptions that can be made about Judaism.
Right.
And so that's why I like that Who is a Jew book, because I think it makes children understand that whether you're black or brown or white, you are Jewish. It doesn't matter. There is no one look anymore.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really, Heidi, appreciate so much the time, and a great honor to be invited to speak on your podcast.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I write with my body, I write with my hands. My heart's no more than 100 crumpled pages. Every desire, every demand follows the line my pencil traces.
Next month, we'll meet Arlen Imberman, a graphologist or handwriting expert, and the author of the book Signature for Success. She'll take a look at my handwriting and the handwriting of guest authors Jacqueline Jules and Rabbi Sherry Hirsch. Arlen will reveal the secrets behind the shape, size, pressure, spacing, slant, and legibility of our penmanship. It should be pretty interesting. Just a little self-reflection in time for the high holidays. And thanks, by the way, to Goki Quarteto for this background music. The song is called Bad Writer. Don't forget to tune in next month.
Cake holes and glasses in the yard.
Laurel Snyder writes secular books for adults and kids, including a brand new picture book called Inside the Slidey Diner. She's the editor of an essay collection for adults called Half-Life, Jewish Tales from Interfaith Homes, which parallels her own upbringing. I first met Laurel by email when she wrote to ask me if I thought that consciously leaving out Christian content when writing a book made that book Jewish. We got into an energetic virtual discussion, which we continued in person when we met up at Book Expo. Listen in. Laurel, you had introduced to me this concept about content of children's books, that if you leave out certain content, that could make it a Jewish book. If you leave out any references to the greater society,
to the Christian world that we live in.
To the Christian world that we live in, because here we are surrounded by it all the time, and there's always references to it that are meaningless practically in a lot of books that we read.
They're the furniture that's sort of in the room of our lives.
So there's Christian references that are the furniture and scenery of our lives. And so, picture books that are in the countryside, you might see a church steeple.
Right.
So you had raised the question, does it make it, in a way, a Jewish book if it does not contain any of that content, because then it's a book that a Jewish family can read without ever being jarred out of their own Jewish world.
That's right. And for me, as a mother, building a library for my children, that's sort of the sticking point. My children are the children of intermarriage, so they're encountering these issues as complicated identity. This is not the encroaching Christian world on them.
Right.
This is, Daddy's not Jewish, Mommy's Jewish, but we're Jewish as a household, and we don't have a Christmas tree, and we don't have Easter egg. Sort of those things happen maybe at your friend's house, or they happen maybe even at school. And so when I write, I think about this as sort of how can I pull out the Christianity, and then I feel like, well, now is that artificial? Am I creating a fake world? I don't know.
Because the kids do live in a world where they will see that in their surroundings.
But they also live in a world where they will see sexuality and, the things that aren't necessarily bad, but that I'm not ready to discuss, or that I don't think they need to be handling at that moment in time. And it's the same kind of thing. And in some ways, it's easier to deal with The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Right.
Because it's Christmas.
It's a direct
this is a book about Christmas. You think it's funny because it's awesome because it's Dr. Seuss.
Right.
Yeah, and that's Christmas, and you know what that is, and we don't do that at our house. But yeah, it's a funny book, and I love it too.
Yeah, and that's even easier in a way, because just like, it's not like you only want to read books from your own ethnic group.
Of course.
You could read them a Christmas book and enjoy it and say, that was a fun book, but we're not doing it at our house.
Right.
But it was still a fun book to read, and we enjoyed visiting somebody else's custom. But when it's a book that it's just sort of slid in there as part of this this is the world, here's the world is
Right.
full of churches, which is actually, reality, that there's a lot of neighborhoods which are predominated by
Right.
churches, but
I
it
think
sort
it
of sets
probably-
up a whole different thing.
For me, that is becoming the definition of a Jewish book. And I sometimes feel... and
Wait, what's the definition? The definition is a book that avoids mentioning any...
a book that helps me construct a Jewish identity for my family, for my household.
whether or not the book has overt Jewish content
not
or
it's
simply
explicit.
supports a world that does not advocate Christian
Maybe
ways of
that's
being.
not the right
or-
term. Because it's not that it's a Jewish book. It's that... Shlemiel went to Warsaw or whatever. When
Right.
Shlemiel goes to Warsaw
Yeah.
or Shemazel goes to Warsaw?
Shlemiel.
Shlemiel goes to Warsaw. Shlemiel goes to Warsaw is a Jewish book.
Right.
And the book about the golden shoes and the Easter bunny or whatever, that is very much not a Jewish book.
Right.
If you then have a book that is
Right.
consciously devoid of Christian content,
It's the buffer zone.
yeah, it's the buffer zone. And when I think about Where the Wild Things Are or In the Night Kitchen, in my house, that's the buffer zone. Sort of like, I'm a Jewish author, but I'm not necessarily writing books that are overtly Jewish, because I'm not writing books about religion for children. I'm writing books about summertime. And then I started thinking about that and realized that didn't know why my families were named Connors and Simpson. I had somehow, I think, bought into this idea that is tow-headed children running around
Right.
on farms, and
Right.
that's not the Jewish experience, and that's why I hadn't named them Levy.
Uh-huh.
And so we named them Levy, and so now one family is the Odells, my mother's Irish Catholic, and one family is the Levys.
Cool.
And there is no overt Judaism in it.
Uh-huh.
They both happen to have brown hair, but if you didn't know the name was Levy, you would probably assume as a reader that they were not Jewish because they live in Iowa, and because the children are just sort of running around having regular summertime stuff, and like Bubby doesn't come to visit,
Right.
and they don't have brisket for dinner.
Right.
But most of the Jewish families I know, they
Right.
don't call their grandma Bubby, and
Right.
they don't have brisket for dinner, and
Right.
so in some ways, I want to think now, now I've written a Jewish book.
A lot of non-Jewish readers will never know the difference. So their name's Levy. They don't even know from
But the
Levy.
kid- but the little
people
kid,
who,
right.
who know that Levy is a Jewish name are
Will
going to be like,
recognize
"Oh, look,
themselves
we're
in it."
there. And then that's exciting for them.
And that feels like a big deal to me, but I don't know why I didn't see that before. Like, I don't understand how I missed that. I don't know.
Well, actually, what I wanted to talk about was the whole bigger idea of boundaries and inclusiveness and stuff like that. Because with your book Half-Life, which is a really intense book, I have to say that I can only read one story at a time because each one is so intense, so I haven't even finished it yet because I can't just plow through it.
Yeah.
Basically, what it's about is not even so much being half Jewish as just feeling included or not feeling included.
And
I
a
think.
lot of people that have come to events that I've done with synagogues and JCCs and things asked questions about transgender issues, about gay marriage issues. I mean, I've seen a very interesting cross-section of Jewish and non-Jewish culture because people see it as an identity book. And I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect that it is about the world becoming more and more and more heterogeneous, and that is at once threatening to the sort of archetypes we've got set up for ourselves, and at the same time really wonderful if you look at all the possibilities for all the ways in which the community will grow. For me, the interfaith issue, assuming that you're not Orthodox, because that's a different issue. Like, halakha is a different issue, and if you don't think I'm Jewish because you're that kind of Jew, I have absolute respect for the fact that you have a different set of rules than I do.
Right.
But I run into trouble when I'm talking to somebody, like, they like bagels, and maybe they went to Camp Ramah or something for 2 years, and they're not going to marry outside the faith. And if that is your definition of what it means to be Jewish, that as a definition of Jewish life won't last, can't survive.
Right.
People are looking at intermarriage and assimilation and saying intermarriage is the root cause of assimilation. And in fact, assimilation's been happening as a widespread trend much, much longer than intermarriage. In fact, it's the other way around, I think. Assimilation is the root cause of the intermarriage that's happening. But what that means is that we don't have to lose our Jewish identity in our intermarriage, and that we can't change the numbers everybody's so scared about now of intermarriage, but we can, if we push content and make it meaningful and relevant and real, we can staunch the flow of meaning and lack of content.
What's really interesting is in the essays that you edited in Half-Life, it seems like none of those families decided to really pursue any of the religions that they had inherited. So they basically gave their kids very little information, and the kids kind of grew up confused.
In some ways, these are the cautionary tales.
Right. Sometimes at the end of the story, when they talk about their own family that they've now formed and how they're embracing
whatever it is
Judaism or whatever they're embracing, that they're actually embracing something.
Right.
And I guess that's the trick,
Yeah.
is embrace something and go with it.
I can't tell anybody how to live their life, and everybody's different, and I don't believe that there is one way ever in a million years. But what I can track as a trend in the hundreds of people that sent me queries, who sent me essays, overwhelmingly, the best and most interesting stories were the hardest to read. And they were almost all situations where an identity had not been chosen, where people hadn't laid down groundwork for their children, and the children got lost somewhere in the shuffle. And that I had been incredibly fortunate to have grown up in a family that had no idea what it was doing, but for whatever reason, my parents said, all right, we're going to pick a set of rules, and we're going to follow that set of rules. If I took anything away from Half-Life, it was that, well, I didn't want to say that there was one right way. There was a dangerous trend in the other direction.
And not picking a way.
And not picking a way.
Uh-huh.
You can't, it doesn't make sense logically. You cannot tell your children that Jesus Christ is their Savior and then tell him that there is no Jesus.
Right.
It's like the kid is going to be confused.
It's like on Star Trek when they tell the computer, I am lying, that was a lie, and the computer blows up.
Right, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it's like. Yeah, the sort of we'll see what happens later, or let them choose kind of thing.
Right.
Or it applies to how you sort of choose your interfaith identity. It applies to the books you choose for your children to read. It applies to sort of the things and words and tropes that you put into your fiction. Like it is about sort of careful choosing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think being intentional is maybe a big part of, and in some ways the purpose of, a lot of Jewish practice.
Certainly for most of us today. I think most of the people I know who keep some level of Shomer Shvat or Kashrut or any of this stuff, it's because they've recognized that that's important.
So they're doing it to be mindful.
Right.
As opposed to just following rules for the sake of following rules. And I think it means more to you if you're doing it that way, to be mindful.
Yeah, and it makes things sacred. I mean, that is for me in many ways the sacred. I feel like we've ranged around a whole lot of stuff, but at its core they are related to one another. That sort of, increasingly there are a number of ways of being Jewish in the world, and increasingly they are not visibly Jewish, and they are not necessarily related to issues of faith, and they are not necessarily halachic, and they certainly don't look Hasidic or like Polish or whatever.
Right.
And I feel it's important to create something which is at once sort of heterogeneous and different and contemporary for our children.
We would love to hear from you. Email bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or post a comment on our website. The Book of Life is a podcast service of Congregation B'nai Israel of Boca Raton, Florida. Check out our website at cbiboca.org. The show is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries, tending the tree of knowledge and promoting Jewish reading by supporting Judaic libraries and librarians. Visit them on the web at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilich Makers Klezmer String Band from Sacramento, California, whose CDs feature upbeat music from Ashkenazic and Sephardic traditions with Brazilian, Gypsy, and Celtic influences. Borrow their CDs at the Feldman Library or buy your own copies at freilichmakers.com. To download episodes of the Book of Life podcast, visit us on the web at bookoflifepodcast.com. Links to the books and CDs mentioned on the show are available on this website. You can also hear the latest episode by phone. Just call 916-313-3820. Thanks for listening, and happy reading!